But, Jeff, before we get to any of our fans today, and I really want to make this a fan-centralized program because a lot of times we have guests and we have a lot of other things to talk about, but I'd really love to hear from as many fans as we possibly can today and give them a chance because I know they're itching to go as we get closer and closer to getting players on the field. But I cannot begin the show with those folks until we get done with this morning's headlines. And we have a few now. We know that as we are taping this program, the NFL is getting prepared for another conference call and more conversation amongst themselves and amongst those in the Players Union to figure out the final details to see if they can get these players back out on the field. Now, there are a couple of critical issues that have broken this morning. Pro Football Talk has released a couple of stories that are certainly very significant as we continue to progress towards having football. One of them is the National Football League, reportedly, according to Pro Football Talk, is willing to reduce its recommendation for preseason games from 4 to 2, now down to only 1. And this, of course, is after the Players Union had said last week they were insisting on not having any preseason games.
Does it say when? When is the 1?
It would be the third week of the preseason. Now, according to, again, Pro Football Talk, they're saying the schedule would include 3 weeks of strength and conditioning work, 10 days of non-padded practices, 10 days of padded practices over the final 2 weeks. Therefore, it would be week 3 of the preseason schedule. As it stands now, the Giants were supposed to play the Green Bay Packers at MetLife Stadium on August the 29th. I'll be honest with you. I think if week 3 of the preseason becomes the only preseason game played, I think the league is going to readjust the opponents because I think they'll do them on a much more regional basis. And I just have a gut feeling the Giants would not wind up playing the Packers.
They play the Jets.
I would think so.
I mean, why not? There's
or potentially the New England Patriots.
Yeah, just something where people can get to those games at the players. I mean, there's not going to be any people there. Listen, I think that this is just, every day is different. The players are not going to care. I mean, they say that they don't want any. But listen, if the teams want one, you know why the teams want one, Paul? They need to evaluate. You know what I'm saying?
Well, they want to go through a dry run, Jeff, and I don't blame them. I think everybody, including the players, should want to go through the drill. You had a little bit of a question on that, but I think if I were a player, I'd want to go through a drill too.
Well, the young guys would. The older veterans could care less. They really could. It's more of a chance to get hurt. The dry run, I think, would be more important to the teams that are new coaching staffs, and but you could practice the on-field, things you got to do. I mean, I don't know. If it's me, I would like to play a preseason game just because I like to go in the game, but I think I'm different because I don't have to go out there and hit guys and get tackled and really have a chance to get hurt. You know what I'm saying? So that's important, especially because we talk about this all the time where there's been no off-season on-field stuff. So I think the more when you talk about how many days they said unpadded practices, and you got to get these guys in shape to play football, especially when they're real bullets and they start flying around and these things it's live and it counts. So I don't know. I think the union wants 0. They agree on 1. They've gone from 4 to 2 to 1 and I don't know, Paul. It's tough.
Okay, I've got 2 very important questions for you. Let's assume, hypothetically, that the 1 preseason game...
Okay, we're going with 1.
...winds up happening. Okay, question number 1. How many regulars do you think will see any snaps in those games, period?
Well, I feel like if there's going to be a game, you might as well use it, right? There's nothing you can do about it. So I think they'll treat the game like a third preseason game. They're gonna play the first teamers for the half, and then that's what I would do. That's what I would do.
Question number 2: How many roster spots do you think would be up for grabs or could be won by some of these young fellas, specifically at the back end of the depth chart, who may only have 1 piece of game tape to try to steal a spot?
I don't know how many, but I will tell you that if we're going to the game and we're a coaching staff, we have a list of players that are in a heated battle, especially at the back end of the roster, like you said, and that we will pay we'll pay more attention to those players because of that. The rest of the roster is set. They know who's going to be playing first and second teams. It's the back end of the roster, special teams guys. So, we go into this game and say, listen, we're going to take a look. Really, this game is dependent upon us getting in, learning the sideline. I'm talking about the Giants now, and learning how to do things, to come out at the halftime, and do all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to look at these position matchups and competitions that are going on, and that's, I would say, probably maybe 5, 6 to 8 players that we're going to look at to see who can make this team, the back end of the roster.
Given the uniqueness of everything that has happened during this offseason, how much of a percentage of a player's grade do you think will rely on whatever that game tape shows, because it is their only shot?
That's a good question. Of course, obviously that's up to the team, the way that they, if they put these players in a good position to battle during practices, and listen, if I'm one of the head coaches and I'm speaking to my team and I know that there's only going to be one preseason game, I'm sure enough going to tell these teams, listen, you guys always thought how important practice is. We've always told you it's important. It's even more important now because you are being evaluated in practices a little bit more than we would normally because we have 4 preseason games. And remember, the roster has been expanded and the cutdowns are no longer, so these players can play 4 preseason games. Before you couldn't. Now they can't because if this is passed, there's only going to be 1. So you are going to be, the practices are going to be more. So I would think maybe the last 10% of the evaluation will be to that game. Most of it's going to be in practice, Paul. Yeah.
Well, speaking of rosters, Jeff, it's very interesting that you brought that up because that's the next point that is going to be discussed today. Well, it's the league and the labor union trying to figure out now what you're going to do with positive COVID tests and how does this apply to the practice squad. And again, Pro Football Talk coming out with a story this morning saying that the league's proposal to the Players Association contemplates a broad expansion of the rules regarding the practice squad to allow a team to add up to 16 players on its game day roster up to 90 minutes before kickoff. Now, what they're saying is the practice squad would expand from 12 up to 16 players, and up to 6 members of each practice squad would have no limitation on the number of accrued seasons, which means you could have a 10-year veteran on the practice squad, and that is a stark contrast to what we have seen in the past. The reason that I like that is because that guy has a better chance to be game ready if he is suddenly thrown into an emergency situation and has to get his butt onto the field.
Yeah. It also doesn't damage the sport. And what I mean by that, the quality of play. I mean, if you got all these young guys coming off the practice squad that are now starting, you know what happens. It's watered down. So you want to want some of those veteran guys that weren't able to be on the practice squad that could be, and then they can come into a game and they can play. I like it. Obviously, this is just a 1-year situation. I know that before this they were talking about, guys being able to move on and off the roster and practice squad without being, acquired by other teams because you make the move. Remember, when you go up to the active squad and you're put back down to this practice squad, there's a team that can pick you up, and you always run that risk, right? So I like it. And again, this is all COVID related, right? I mean, because if something happens at a position where it knocks out 2 or 3 guys and you got two veteran or even young players on the practice squad that could come in and fill in those, and you feel comfortable about it, good stuff. It has to happen, though, because you think about it, Paul, and going from 12 to 16, was it 12 to 16? Or was it?
They'd like to go up to 16 now, yes.
They're going to go to 16. I don't think why anybody would. Well, first of all, the players' union is not going to argue that because they want more players having jobs, so that's not going to be a problem. And I think the league is not going to argue the point that you could have veterans on there because they don't want to water down, they're not watered down. They just don't, you know what I'm saying? They don't want to have the product needs to be good. You don't want to have games that are just going to be ugly because they have all these young players because, guys are sick. So I think it'll happen, and I like that. I do.
If you remember, a couple of months ago, we had this conversation shortly after the draft, and I said even then that would be a great idea because
sure
it's
would.
really a win for everybody. Now, the only requirement for the immediate promotion of a practice squad player on the morning of a game is that the positive diagnosis for a COVID test has to happen after the 4 p.m. deadline the previous day. Okay? So, in other words, it has to be basically a COVID emergency where after the 4 p.m. deadline, which is when all transactions have to occur, as you know, Jeff, the day before a game, if you get a positive test later on that evening or first thing the morning of a game, that is the rule that they're talking about to give you, quote, an emergency activation per se. And again, they're going to give you up to 16 of those on the morning of the game. That's a lot of players.
It is a lot of players, but how does that happen? I mean, if you're on the road, I mean, that means you got to bring all those guys with you.
Oh boy, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
Because if it's 4 o'clock, and all of a sudden that evening, and you don't have anybody there with you, and you're on the road in Cincinnati, I mean, what are you going to do? Put them on a private jet that morning and fly them out there?
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that, Jeff. You're right.
So
Home
that's an
games, it's no
interesting-
big deal, but road games, that is a logistical
And
nightmare.
see, this is the problem. And when I mean problem, it's just something that everybody has to work through, both sides, the NFLPA and the owners. And there's just so many different angles to everything that we talk about. Everything that we bring up, and everybody that talks about this roster now, well, it's layered. There's so many different aspects that you have to be aware of, and that's one of them that you'd have to, so maybe now they're able to say, okay, you know what, you're able to travel now rather than traveling with your 55 guys, because remember the roster went up to 55 this year, that you'll be able to go with 70 guys on the road.
Jeff, I've got another question for you. Okay, if you're so concerned about guys getting infected the night before a game, maybe the practice squad guys have to go commercial on a different flight. Because what good is it if you have a guy test positive, let's say 7 o'clock on Saturday night, and he's come into contact with those practice squad guys? Then they're not, quote, clean players that you can just pluck off the practice squad and put on the field. If they're going to be looked at as emergency fill-in guys, don't you have to have a guarantee that they're not sick?
Well, they've been tested too, so you would know that they're not, right?
Yeah, but if they're on the charter with a player who tests positive, that's taking a more of a risk.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I mean,
right?
Listen, I just don't know how often and they're going to get tested. Is it every single day? I know that the players, from what I've been reading about, want testing every day because they want to make sure. And from what I'm getting from this is the players want to play. I mean, if you noticed that yesterday there was on Twitter, all these players were sending out these tweets yesterday, attacking a lot of different angles of this. But the bottom line is that they're saying we want to play. We're just worried about our safety. We're worried about protocol, and we just want a little bit more clarity going forward in all this. So that's why they're having these emergency meetings with the NFL owners and all the stuff that goes with it.
Well, by the way, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but I'm so happy that Major League Baseball got underway over the weekend. We saw exhibition games between the Yankees and the Mets at Citi Field and Yankee Stadium. Now, I get it. It's a different sport, not nearly as much contact and all that stuff. I get it. But I'm just so happy that we actually saw a professional league put a product on the field. And to my knowledge, there were no setbacks anywhere. And I'm sorry, but I feel good about that because I do think that could be a foreshadowing of some hopeful signs for the National Football League.
Yeah, I think so. I just think, as we move forward in the season, both collegiately and professionally in the towns and cities and states that this COVID is, having coming back out and it's being stronger. I think that, as things get better, the better off we're going to be. And I think that, I'm looking at some of the numbers today on Twitter from, my son at Rutgers in the Big Ten. I've been following this. Is that, it's good. It's good. I mean, the testing numbers they're really good with the players that are actually in the off-season programs right now with them. So God only hopes that this thing runs its course and we can get some real football on the field. Not only for the players, but everybody loves football. They love to go to games. They love tailgating. They love the game itself, and the whole aspect of that Sunday morning waking up and going to a football game or watching your favorite team on TV. And it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how. That's the big thing.
Okay, Jeff, I
There's
promise
so
the
many
fans,
questions. So many questions.
No, hey, and that's just the nature of what we're dealing with. Let's face it, this is a very unique situation.